If there is such a thing as the world's worst dad award, my dad no doubt would be the one to get it. He was the most selfish, self-centered, antisocial person ever. My mom was out of the picture ever since I was not even a toddler, which meant it was just me and my dad. And no, I didn't have any chance of doing the usual father-son stuff with him, like playing baseball or watching football together. He was hence the worst, not only because he didn't give me any time, but also because he used me and took advantage of me. He used me to get girls ever since I was a kid. But before we move on, like this video, hit that subscribe button and activate the notification bell. And luck will follow you like a truck. Trust me, it works. Let me explain. When I was a kid, my dad would hire a new nanny every month. I know that doesn't sound very fishy, but it happened every month, like a ritual, without a break. One time, before my last nanny disappeared, something strange happened. I was around 14 at the time. I had just got back home from school and wanted a snack. I saw my nanny in the living room, so I went to request her to make me one. "Myra, would you make me a snack?" I asked. "Why would I? I don't know you. Where am I?" she said and stormed out of the house as fast as she could. Weird, right? I know. That was why that event specifically stayed in my memory. For a few years after that, everything was fine until one day. I was about to go out of the house to play basketball with some friends when my dad suddenly stopped me at the door. "I have something to talk to you about," he said, so I came back in. "What is it?" I asked. I was just thinking maybe he wanted me to bring in some groceries, but what he asked of me shocked me completely. "I want you to get me girls," he said without a bit of hesitation. Now, my dad was not the making a joke type, so I knew he was serious. "No, Dad, I would never do anything like that," I replied as I was annoyed. But then he started speaking as if he was blackmailing me. "You do that or you don't have a home anymore. You're not going to get a penny from me," he said and left. Do you guys see what happened here? I was left without a choice. I had to do everything that he asked. He demanded girls with specific features, like the girls had to have red curly hair and had to be over 5'7" in height. Just for that reason, he made a couple of fake IDs that gave me access to clubs. That was how it went. I pretended to be older than my actual age and entered bars. There, I met with girls that met my father's taste. I talked with them for a while and asked them to come home with me. It might seem like I'm bluffing, but I never used force on any of the girls I brought home. Thanks to my handsome, soft, and humble looks, they would just be ready to come with me without any question. After bringing them home, I left them in the living room as my dad had instructed and went up to my room. I had no idea what happened after that. It was just a huge dark blank in my mind, and honestly, I wanted to keep it that way. That was why I never questioned my dad about what exactly he needed the girls for. I just went out and got them home twice a week. However, I didn't always pick the girls up from the bars. Sometimes I would make a trip to the beach for that, or sometimes the public park. It was easier because of my good looks and sweet talking. But the girls that I picked up, they weren't attractive to me at all. Not even one. They were just for my dad. One day, I was in the park looking for a girl to take home when suddenly I saw a girl sitting by herself enjoying a sandwich. She was so beautiful that she just blew my mind away at the first glance. I couldn't resist but approached her and talked. "I'm Edna," she said with her soft and soothing voice, and I also introduced myself. She had the most beautiful eyes, and her hair was red and curly but short. We talked for a long time, and suddenly I realized what I was there for. However, I just couldn't bring myself to take her for my dad. So I just got her number and came back home without a girl. And you might have already guessed that my father was furious, like a madman when I showed up alone. "You're not getting any money this week, or food," he said, but I just ignored him and went straight to my room. Honestly, I couldn't care less as my head was in the clouds because of the girl I had just met. After getting to my room, I locked the door, jumped on my bed, and started chatting with her on the phone. She was the first and only girl I had ever liked, so I was naturally talking with her all the time. And then one thing led to the other, and we eventually started dating as she had the same feeling for me. Around that time, I completely stopped getting girls for my dad because, first, I didn't like it, and second, I wanted to invest all my time in Edna, which she deserved. She was such a good influence in my life, like an angel. I was just falling deeply in love with her. One day, Edna and I were on one of our regular dates when suddenly we felt like we were being followed. First, a shaky-looking car was tailing us on the way, and then some guy with black overalls on was suspiciously walking behind us when we were strolling around the park. However, after some time, the guy just walked away, so we ignored the whole situation and focused on enjoying each other's company. That day when I went home, my dad was waiting for me in the living room. I was trying to go straight to my room, but he stopped me and called me over. And again, he started up with bringing him the girls and all that nonsense. "Dad, how long are you planning to use me like this? First the nannies when I was young and now all this?" I said in anger. "I want you to get me one, specifically this one. Otherwise you can get out of my house and never come back," he said, and passed me a picture. When I saw who was in the picture, I was so shocked and angry that my blood literally started to boil. It was Edna, and the picture was taken on our date. It finally made sense to me that my dad was the one stalking us on our date. It made me so angry. There was no way I was going to give Edna to my dad. She was my girlfriend. "You're just shameless, aren't you? You're trying to take away the one person in this world that makes me happy," I screamed at him. Without thinking any further, I went up to my room, grabbed my things, and stormed out of the house. But just as I got out, I got a notification on my phone. It was a text from Edna. "Have you seen the news recently?" it read. "No, why?" I replied. She immediately called me and told me that there was a sketch of a person that looked just like me all over the news. "The police are looking for you. They're saying you've kidnapped girls. What's going on?" she said and started crying and demanding me to explain. "I'll explain everything, but you have to meet me first," I told her, and she agreed. She immediately picked me up in her car, and from there we made our way to a motel. There I sat down and explained how my dad had been using me all my life to get girls. "He used me to get nannies when I was a child, and then to lure them to the house when I got the looks," I told her, but she said nothing and kept looking at me. "Trust me, I have no idea why he needed them. I never asked him," I told her and explained further how he had blackmailed me. "Could he possibly be a criminal?" I said to myself, worrying my heart out. "Yes," Edna said, "but he's not the worst." I was shocked. How on earth could she possibly know that, I thought, but I didn't have to think for long because she told me what was really going on. "I was hired by the FBI and knew all about you and your father before I crossed paths with you in the park," she said, and my heart just sank. She told me that the FBI had been investigating me and my father for a long time. "We thought both of you were guilty at first, but as I got to know you, I figured out you were innocent and just his pawn," she added. She also told me that my dad was not a life-threatening criminal. In fact, she also didn't have any idea what he did with the girls. They just knew that the girls I brought home and the nannies when I was a child were found at random places, physically unharmed but with temporary memory loss. "The FBI is on their way to arrest your dad. I'll take you there if you want," she said, and I agreed to that because I also wanted answers about what my dad was really up to. When we reached the house, I made my way in to find that my dad had already been taken in. However, an officer there started explaining the situation to me. For that, he led me to the basement, an area that my dad had restricted me from setting foot in. When I went down there, I was so shocked that I almost passed out. There was a fully equipped scientific lab down there, and I hadn't even known anything about it. "Turns out, your dad was trying to clone people. That's why he needed people with a scientific gene set," he said, and told me that my dad was a mad scientist. He also added that my dad was giving those girls memory loss tablets after taking their DNA samples and dropping them off at random locations. And for the reason that he was plain mad, they were sending him to a psychiatrist facility instead of prison. All that information was too much to take in for me, so I got out of there to get some fresh air and process everything. At that time, Edna came to me and hugged me. "Well, despite everything, what we have is real," she said, and that was such a huge relief to me because I had thought I had lost her because of all the drama. After that, my life finally began to seem normal. Now that a father who made me get him girls was locked away, I started to enjoy life fully. However, despite everything my dad put me through, I still went to visit him at the asylum sometimes. He was my dad after all. But one day, something strange happened. I was in one of those visits with my dad when he suddenly pulled me to the side and started whispering something in my ear. I didn't hear it clearly at first, but then I finally understood. "Be careful. They're watching you. They'll get to you and me. Be careful," he said in a panicky tone with tears in his eyes. And after that, the visitation time was over. A few days later, I got a call from the asylum telling me my dad had disappeared and was nowhere to be found, and asked me to call them if I got any information. It got me thinking, did someone make my dad do all those things? I mean, he was getting money without any source of earning. Was he working on someone's order? Did they take him from the asylum to complete the experiment? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and check out other videos on the channel.
I had just finished stuffing the last of my stuff into a bag when my mom shouted, "Elle, come on, time to go." Throwing my backpack over my shoulder, I slid down the railing of the stairs one last time. I was used to moving, but I really liked this house. My dad was standing at the door of the house. He gave me that look, the look he always gave me when we moved, that apologetic look. I could tell he felt bad, but he didn't have to make my mom and I move just because he needed to be closer to his clients for a few months. He could just travel back and forth. Before I continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to let us know if you want more insane stories like this one. I got into the car and immediately put my earbuds in. Moving always put me in a bad mood. We were going to be in the car for a few hours, so I decided to just take a nap. I was trying to fall asleep when I heard my mom and dad talking. My dad said, "I feel bad. Elle being so lonely is my fault." He then raised his voice, and looking into the rear view mirror, asked me, "Elle, are you awake?" To which I responded with a sleepy grunt. "This is our last move. I promise." I jolted awake and sat up energetically. "Really?" I asked him. He nodded, and I couldn't help tearing up. I started imagining finally having a solid group of friends. Since we moved so often, I never bothered to make friends. That way I wouldn't get hurt when we eventually left, but now it was different. We stopped at a small hotel by the highway a few hours later. This trip was going to take around 4 days. My mom and I decided to drive to the nearest town and get something for dinner, while Dad stayed behind and took a shower. While we were shopping in the local supermarket, my phone buzzed. I figured it was my dad, but it was a message on social media. I opened it and discovered it was from a boy, and a cute one too. He said he always saw me eating alone at my old school and wanted to talk to me, but that I suddenly disappeared, so he never had the chance. I asked him a bunch of questions to make sure he was real. I even asked him to send me a picture of our school yearbook. I had never seen him before, but I kept to myself, so maybe I just missed him in the crowd of people I avoided. My mom told me to hurry up with the shopping cart, so I slid my phone into my pocket and hurried over to her. My dad went to bed earlier than my mom and I that night because he was tired from driving. My mom stayed up watching a movie on her laptop, and I stayed up talking to Max, the boy who texted me. We talked about why I moved around so much, about school and teachers we hated. He was very funny, and although our conversations were just friendly, I like to think he meant whatever he said with flirty undertones, because I know I did. I talked to Max whenever I could during the road trip. It felt kind of weird, but I had a crush on him. I felt like I could tell him anything, really, and he made having left our last home even more sad. My first day of school at the new school was really scary. The school was twice as big as my old school, which was already huge. I felt like I could get lost, but then I remembered I could make connections with people now because I was going to finish high school there in 2 years. Plenty of time to make loads of friends. I asked a girl who looked just about my age for directions and headed to class. I talked to loads of people during and in between class. They were excited that there was a new girl, and I was excited to get to know all of them. I couldn't stop smiling all day because I was finally not alone. During lunch, I sat at a table at the cafeteria and people sat around me, asking me about myself and introducing themselves. The girl I had asked for directions earlier sat next to me and asked me, "Do you have a boyfriend?" I didn't really know what to say because I wanted them to think I was cool, but I didn't want to lie to them. I eventually did lie. I said that Max was my boyfriend, but he lived back home. I showed them pictures of him and all, and I could tell they were impressed, but I felt kind of guilty lying like that. Later that day, I was unpacking boxes in my room when my phone buzzed. My stomach filled with butterflies when I saw it was Max. He was asking me how my first day of school went. I told him everything, about how I always had a crowd around me and made tons of friends. He wrote, "Wow, you're already replacing me?" with a sad face emoji next to it. I chuckled at how cute he was, and then realized I should probably tell him what I said about him. I bit my nails in nervousness when I saw that he left my message on seen after I told him that I had said he was my boyfriend. I tried to take my mind off of him the rest of the day, because hours later, he still hadn't replied. I worked on some schoolwork, baked a pie, unpacked my entire wardrobe, and organized my messy bookshelf, trying to work off the nerves. But I still had an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. What if he thought I was a weirdo and never wanted to talk to me again? Around a week passed and Max still had not texted me. I sent him a couple messages because I was worried I had ruined our friendship. At school, I barely thought about him because I was always distracted. But the second I got home and had free time, he was suddenly all I could think about. I was sitting in the cafeteria with some friends, just talking, when a friend sitting across from me looked behind me and smiled. I was about to turn around when someone's hand covered my eyes. "Guess who?" said a boy's voice. I took his hands off my eyes, and when I turned around, it was Max. I couldn't believe it. I immediately jumped and wrapped my arms around his neck. I realized I was tearing up a bit, so I hid my face on his shoulder. When I let go, I slapped his shoulder playfully and began scolding him for not texting me back. He said he got permission from the principal to visit the school for a day, so we spent the day at school together. I couldn't help just staring at him whenever he talked. I had never even heard his voice before, and any feelings I had for him grew tenfold. After school, we decided to walk home. I was nervous to spend time with him alone, but he held my hand to calm me down. I asked him, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" To which he replied, "I wanted to surprise you." He went quiet a second, and then continued, "I wanted to ask you to be my girlfriend in person, since it's more romantic and all." My heart simply melted. I wrapped my arms around his neck again and hugged him. We got home 10 minutes later. I was super excited to introduce Max to my parents. "Mom, Dad," I said, "this is Max, my boyfriend." My dad and Max shook hands first. Then he shook hands more softly with my mom. "If it's not a problem for you, Mr. and Mrs. Wilkerson, I'd like to take your daughter out on a date today," Max said. I heard my mom stifle back a squeal of excitement, but Dad gave him a disapproving look. Mom elbowed him, after which Dad said, "Yes, no problem, young man." Mom smiled brightly and pulled me upstairs. She must have made me try on a dozen outfits and 5 hairstyles. She finally made me slip on a dress and curled my hair slightly. She put mascara and lip gloss on me. "I just want your first date to be perfect," she said. I managed to escape my mom's clutches and headed back downstairs, but I wanted to hear the awkward conversation between my dad and my boyfriend. As I tiptoed closer, I heard it much less awkward than I expected. "So has your rate gone up, boy?" I heard my dad say, which Max denied. "What rate? What was my dad paying Max for?" I walked in and they both turned to look at me, Max looking guilty. "What rate?" I asked Max specifically, but my dad jumped in saying, "He's gonna mow the lawn for us while he's here, and I asked him to pluck the dandelions too." Max simply nodded, but I noticed he wouldn't look me in the eyes. My dad could fool anyone with how good he was at lying. Everyone except me. I had a feeling he and Max were hiding something from me, but I let it go for the time being. Max took me to a cute little ice cream parlor where we sat, talking for hours. He was funny and charming, so of course my stomach was all butterflies when he talked. I felt comfortable around him. I didn't feel self-conscious if I snorted between laughs, or if I had some ice cream on my chin. He would just laugh and snort back or wipe the ice cream off my chin. We finished our ice cream pretty quickly, so we stood up and went for seconds. I got lemon, and to my surprise, he got peanut butter. I watched him order his ice cream, and when we sat down, he started eating it. "How's your ice cream?" I asked him. "It's great," he replied with a bright smile. "I should call an ambulance or something, though, shouldn't I? Before you pass out?" I asked him. He looked at me like I had just told a joke he didn't understand. "You know, since you're allergic to peanuts," I explained. His eyes grew wide. "You told me you're very allergic to peanuts, so how come you're eating peanut butter ice cream?" I asked him. I put my cup of ice cream down and crossed my arms. Max seemed to deflate. He looked down in shame, before spilling all his secrets to me. He showed me the conversations on his phone, the transactions and the voicemails. I was shocked and hurt. I closed my eyes to keep tears from streaming down my face, but it was in vain. I shot Max an icy glare. He looked desperate and worried. "But I want to get to know you," he said, reaching for my hand, but I moved it away and stormed off. I slammed the door open when I got home and went straight to my dad's office. "How could you?" I shouted at him. "You're sick! I can't believe you did that to me!" I was offended and I felt invaded. While I thought I was texting a cute boy my age, I was actually texting my own father? His face fell when he registered what I was shouting. "Elle," he began, but I cut him off, saying, "No, you don't get to make excuses. You invaded my privacy. You tricked me and Max. You hired an actor to pose as my boyfriend? What made you think that was okay? It's messed up." My mom then walked into the room because she heard the noise. I told her what he had done, and it was reassuring to see that she was just as shocked and disgusted as I was. Dad frantically tried to explain to my mom and I why he would do such a thing, but nothing he said could make it better. I mean, he paid a boy to use his picture and then pose as my boyfriend? Am I crazy to think that's messed up? I avoided him around the house for months, until the day he left. He kept his promise. We wouldn't move again, but he did. As he drove away from our house, I stood with my mom at the front door of our house. My mom wiped a tear from her cheek and asked me, "Will you ever forgive your father, darling?" To which I replied, "Of course. I know he didn't mean to hurt me." My mom sniffled and walked into the house. I was about to do the same when I heard a familiar voice behind me say, "Elle." I turned around and saw Max standing there with a bouquet of beautiful flowers. We stood there for a second, just looking at each other. I hadn't seen him in months. I had almost forgotten what he looked like, because he was only really in my life for half a day. "Elle, I'm sorry," he said, to which I replied that it wasn't his fault. I meant what I said at that ice cream place. "I do want to get to know you. Everything I learned about you is amazing. Please, just give me a chance." He gave me the bouquet of flowers. It was as big as my entire upper body. I looked at him and couldn't help smiling. I asked him, "Want to go for some peanut butter ice cream?" And we walked hand in hand, taking turns carrying the enormous bouquet that I didn't want out of my sight just yet.
Hi, my name is Camilla, and I can't believe I have to say this, but my father actually values money more than he loves me. Growing up, I was a real daddy's girl. I loved hanging out with him, and he'd take me to so many fun trips. We had a great relationship. He works as a software engineer and knows a lot about computers, so he spends a lot of time online. He is also an amateur photographer, or so I thought. It turned out that the reason why he was always taking pictures of me was not as innocent as I believed. Dad would take me to the zoo, the park, or any other fun location and ask me to pose for pictures. Of course, I did as he asked me, and it was always so much fun. I loved seeing how the pictures turned out, and we'd have a great time browsing through them later on. Dad always told me that I grew up so fast, and he wanted to be able to have memories of when I was younger. It was so sweet, and I really did believe him. Why would a daughter doubt her dad has her best interests at heart? No matter where we went, he would always take pictures of me. Not just one or two, but dozens. He kept asking me to pose on different parts of the park or the zoo or anywhere else we were visiting. As I grew up, he even began buying me the most beautiful outfits. I thanked him so much and was happy to have new clothes almost every single week. So when he asked me to take new pictures, you can imagine that I was quick to comply. After all, he spoiled me with so many gifts, and I loved seeing him happy. Once in a while, I would sit in the living room and open one of my dad's many old photo albums. There were so many of those, and I loved checking out how I looked back when I was a kid, especially after I became a teenager. I had so many fond memories of those times, and Dad would sometimes sit with me and we'd reminisce on our adventures. I have to admit that by the time I turned 17, I began finding my dad's insistence of taking pictures of me all the time kind of weird. Sure, it was cute and fun when I was little, but now I was almost an adult, and he wanted to take pictures of me constantly. I was hesitant to confront him about it, since it made him so happy, and I loved my dad, but it was kind of awkward, honestly. In the end, I decided to just go with the flow and told myself that Dad was a bit quirky. That was it. It turned out Dad wasn't just fond of photography, he was using me for money, and I never knew about it. When I turned 19, I decided to Google myself. It was something everyone I knew was doing, and I thought it would be funny to see what I could find about myself online. I wasn't sure what I'd bump into, but I certainly never expected to discover a whole website dedicated to pictures of me. I completely freaked out. The more I saw, the worse it got. It wasn't just one picture or two, but hundreds, perhaps even thousands. And the worst part was, most of them I had never posted online. That meant that someone had found the original pictures and uploaded them without my permission. There were even calendars being sold on that website, and people bought a whole lot of them. The more I looked at the pictures, the more I began to recognize when they were taken. There was only one person who had access to that astonishing number of my pictures: my dad. Of course, I figured out that Dad would never do this to me, so I thought someone might have hacked his accounts. I began to search online, and after hours of investigating, the results left me feeling horrified. My dad was the owner of the page, so there wasn't any doubt that he was the one behind all this mess. I was, of course, incredibly mad. Wouldn't you be furious as well? I felt betrayed and used. I had trusted my dad and posed for all those pictures, and he was selling those online behind my back. Immediately, I confronted my father, and he looked at me as if I was being irrational. He explained that he didn't need permission to post those pics since he was my dad and I was a minor in most of them. I demanded he remove all the photos and was shocked when he refused. I was completely livid. I told him I could never trust him again. He only seemed worried about the pictures. He actually offered to give me money in exchange for the rights of every single picture he took of me in the past. Dad even wanted me to keep posing for new photos. Of course, I immediately refused and stomped away. I haven't spoken to my father since, and I'm not sure I consider him my dad any longer. He is just a manipulator who used his own daughter to earn money. And he didn't even use this income for my education since I took out a student loan in order to go to college. This happened months ago. I haven't called my dad or even visited yet, and I don't think I ever will. I'm too disappointed in him, and I don't think there is any way I'll ever forgive him. What do you think? Would you be mad if your mom or dad did something like this to you? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and check out other videos on the channel. Hi, my name is Karen, and I have a big confession to make. I might have given pills to my dad to make him look more like a woman. Well, in fact, I definitely did. I know it's messed up, but desperate times call for drastic measures. I don't regret my decision, but I have stopped doing it. After all, my plan worked to perfection, and there was no need for him to take the pills any longer. Let me tell you all about how my dad became very feminine for a long time. I was amazed the pills worked so well because he really did look like a masculine woman. Well, let me start by saying that my mom is awesome, and my dad made the biggest mistake of his life by divorcing her. She is an amazing, intelligent, and sweet woman, but Dad wanted to be with younger women. Imagine how annoyed I was at that. Dad gave up his family just to behave like a guy half his age. I wish Dad could be more mature. Now, I have to admit, my father isn't a bad guy. He just makes terrible decisions and tends to decide things on whims. This makes him very impulsive, and he ends up messing up more often than not. He clearly loves me and has raised me well, but as a guy, he's kind of messed up. He wasn't nice at all during the divorce procedures, and so I sort of believed he had some punishment coming. Still, I decided not to jump into action just yet. Maybe Dad would come to his senses, and then he'd go back to Mom. Instead, he got himself the craziest girlfriend in the world. She was mean, annoying, and entitled, but she was hot. That was all my dad saw in her, and she had him wrapped around her little finger. It was so sad. Dad drooled whenever she was around. He was a middle-aged guy letting a girl barely 10 years older than I make every decision for him. I mean, if that was just affecting my dad, then maybe I wouldn't have gotten involved, but it affected me as well. You see, Mom worked long hours. She couldn't take care of me as often as she'd like to. So when Mom and Dad divorced, it was decided that I should go live with my dad instead. I was not happy. I argued that I'd rather be with my mother, but they talked to me and let me know it was best for me to stay with Dad. Mom promised me we'd still spend a lot of time together and I'd go to her place often, but I'd be living most of the week at my father's house. I got incredibly upset. Mom explained that she worked such long hours and she didn't like the idea of having me be all on my own all that time. So it was better if, for the time being, I lived with Dad full time. Look, this sounds mean. I know Dad loves me and I love him. I like spending time with him, but I didn't want to be around him all the time. He was very impulsive, as I said, and his girlfriend was such a mess. I hated Missy, and I know she hated me as well, or at least she really, really didn't like me. Having a teenager at her place was so annoying to her because she didn't get to do whatever she wanted. Missy was so entitled, and oh yes, she began living with my dad like 2 months after the divorce was final. Talk about convenience. You see, Dad is quite wealthy, and Missy had a way of getting him to buy her everything she wanted. It was super annoying, and I would tell my dad that he shouldn't be spending this money on her. Of course, he took her side and said he liked pampering her. I rolled my eyes and shrugged, but I still wasn't happy about her. Missy and I would get into these big arguments, yelling matches almost, like we were sisters or something. She was older than me, but she behaved like a stubborn princess and got annoyed about everything I did. She began acting like a totally evil stepmom, bossing me around as if she had any right to tell me what to do. She liked the power, I think, but of course, I wasn't having it. Every time she told me what to do, I just closed the door to my room and ignored her, or began arguing with her and reminding Missy that this was my dad's house, not hers. Dad was, understandably, not happy about his daughter and his girlfriend fighting all the time, but he refused to take sides. He didn't want either of us to get mad at him, which was super annoying, as you can imagine. Missy was very reckless and juvenile, and she didn't even have a job. She didn't care about me at all and only paid attention to me when she wanted to scold me. I eventually had enough and decided to talk to my dad again about Missy. I told him that I just didn't get along with his girlfriend, and having to live under the same roof as she was a complete hell. I explained that she made me feel uncomfortable in my own home and wanted nothing to do with her. If he wanted to keep dating her, she could find a place of her own, or I could move back with my mom. Dad asked me to be a bit more patient and try to get along with her. He explained that she was a nice girl and I should try to give her a chance. He told me that he would speak with her and try to get Missy to be nicer to me. Dad promised that with a bit more time it would get better and we would get along far better. I begrudgingly agreed and tried so hard to give Missy a chance, but it only got worse and worse. Plus, Dad was nasty to my mom whenever they had to talk to each other, so I finally had enough. It was time to get Missy to break up with my dad and teach him a lesson in the process. It took me some time to come up with a good plan, but eventually it came to me. Missy was incredibly shallow, and she would never date a guy who she would be embarrassed to be seen with, no matter how much money he had. So I needed to make my dad look like someone she'd be ashamed to date. Now, how could I get that done? I couldn't make him gain weight without him realizing something was wrong and simply changing his diet. So it needed to be something I could slip into his food without him noticing. Suddenly, an idea came to me. What if I gave my dad female hormones and got him to look more like a woman? Then he wouldn't realize why it was happening and would be unable to stop it from happening. How could he guess that his own daughter was slipping pills into his food to get him to look more feminine? Getting the pills was far easier than you might imagine. I had a friend whose older brother was going through a gender change himself. He knew someone who could get me exactly what I needed. It wasn't cheap, but I had been saving my allowance for a long time, and I decided it was a worthy investment. It would allow me to shoot 2 birds with 1 stone. First, I would finally get rid of Missy. Second, I would get my dad to realize that looks weren't everything. I was going to punish him for the way he dumped my mom for a girl half his age and finally have some peace and quiet at my own house. Now, you might think what I did was wrong, but believe me, this woman was too annoying to deal with any longer. And Dad kind of had it coming, so I really don't regret it at all. I knew that the process would be long, but I was ready to wait. After all, in time, Missy would dump Dad and everything would be fine. Every single day, I added pills to Dad's meal. I would ground the little white capsules and then mix the food so that he couldn't tell the difference. They tasted like nothing, so it was impossible to feel the difference unless he actually saw me doing it. Dad thought I was being super helpful and sweet by cooking for him so often, and he raised my allowance. He didn't know that this was helping me buy the pills I was using to punish him and get rid of his girlfriend once and for all. My plan worked like a charm. It took a few weeks, but eventually Dad's features began to change. I had to stop myself from giggling and telling Dad that he looked like a girl. I just acted surprised whenever he asked us if we noticed something different about him. His features were gentler and he didn't grow facial hair so easily. Also, he had to get haircuts far more often because it was growing at an alarming rate. He even began growing female parts on his chest, and most of the shirts he used to wear didn't fit him right any longer. Of course, Missy freaked out and told him he had to do something about it. Dad went to the doctors, but they couldn't understand why his appearance was changing like that. They ran some tests and discovered the extra estrogen in his blood, but no one could explain why this was happening. They gave him some pills to balance this problem out, but I would change them for the female pills instead. That made the change happen faster and faster. Plus, it was so much easier to get him to take the pills daily since he was doing it by himself to try and fix the problem. His jaw seemed more delicate and his body rounded. Dad wasn't a manly man any longer, and even his mood was more feminine and delicate. It was hilarious. I was so happy that Dad finally had his comeuppance and that Missy seemed so annoyed all the time. It was clear that there was trouble in paradise. Dad and Missy weren't getting along at all, and she constantly told him to solve the issue of his appearance. Dad tried everything, including silly so-called miracle cures, but of course, none worked. Whatever he tried taking, I would always replace it with the estrogen pills. Eventually, Missy told my dad that she didn't want to be seen with a guy who looked like a woman. She screamed like a madwoman and ended up breaking up with him. I couldn't believe how well my plan had worked. Imagine how happy I was when Missy packed up her stuff and left. My dad's annoying girlfriend was finally out of my life, and I didn't have to deal with her any longer. After that finally happened, I decided Dad had suffered enough. I stopped giving him the pills. Little by little, he's going back to normal. He is so confused and doesn't understand what managed to finally solve his problem, but he's clearly very relieved. I hope Dad doesn't get himself another crazy girlfriend. If he does, though, I have a whole box of pills with his name on them. Thanks for watching. What is the worst thing you've done to get rid of someone you don't like? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and check out other videos on our channel.